Hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to the overview. Today we're going to be reviewing MindsEye. Okay, so how do we cut this cake? There is low-hanging fruit here, which so many clickbait tubers have grabbed. Yes, I will agree, this is a bad game. There's something wrong with it. But I think the simple rage bait of it's just a bad game, worst game of the year, rah rah rah, close the book, move on, new video, is actually a little bit short-sighted and shallow. If anyone that has actually played this game, which I have, I've clocked through it at 11.5 hours. I will say that it has a sliver of redeeming features. There are some things about maybe like the narrative, but you will realize if you have had any time playing games that it's not just that it's a bad game. We've played bad games. Troubled development, you know, things that haven't been QA'd probably or whatever. Something else is going on here. And we'll discuss it because I've gone and investigated off the path and I've kind of figured it out. And not to bury it, it seems that what's going on here was an attempt at what I would call blue chip AAA industry innovation. And that's not the innovation you and I want. You and I want risky sequels and new things and new IPs, right? A lot of stuff that the AAA industry is allergic to, because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. They become, I call it blue chip development, where you get sequelitis and generic slop rinse and repeated over and over again, because it's dangerous when you've got a bazillion investors behind you to actually risk anything. However, there are industry considerations looming. One is that all these AAA studios are starting to collapse. It's become very apparent that a lot of their profit margin has been held up by third-party investors. And, you know, we don't necessarily need to go into the whole BlackRock and all that sort of thing, but whatever's going on behind the scenes, which we'll never truly know, a lot of the industry is falling over at the top and it's becoming very unsustainable. Now, to you and me down here on the ground floor, the answer is sack, you know, 3/4 of the studios, bring production back and kind of almost abandon AAA and embrace a cleaner, tighter ship built on competence and smaller people. You know, this is all sensible stuff, but this is not what makes you $1 billion. And so what's happened with MindsEye is an attempt to modularize and simplify, streamline, and kind of chop shop, almost industrial revolution, the production methodology to making video games. I'm certain that's what's happened here, and it's all blown up in their face, right? And so yes, it's bad, so we'll come back to that. As far as my scoring system, it's always tricky, right? Because if you're not across it, I'm doing an experimental score system where I rank games from 100 down to 1, and we're populating the list as we go through the year. It's dynamic, it changes. Essentially, low scored equals bad, and the lowest scored game at the moment is the Alters at 74%. Now, not to be someone that wants to argue over what's worse and for what reason, I don't really like that conversation, but here we are. I dislike the Alters and Avowed for very similar reasons, in that it's written by people that would not like me in real life, would actively dislike me if you gave them a Twitter post, and I probably would feel the same, you know? I come from the real world with blue collar and military world experience and background, though I've also dabbled in academia and all that, and I've had the pleasure of meeting actual game developers and these generally soft cushioned people. And I don't really like it when they write stories and dialogue that kind of tries to lecture me about the worldview of a weak person. So yes, MindsEye is not great. It's generic as anything intentionally by design. I think there's an interesting story buried in there, but they've tried to make it episodic content, so they just don't really give you anything. So there's an interesting hook that is never explored and is kept for a cliffhanger. But to say that I had a miserable time playing it would be a lie. And yeah, okay, it's a mess, it's janky, but the writers don't seem to actively hate me in their writing. So I'm putting it at 75% above those two games and below Civ 7, which, you know, in the scheme of things is a more functional game than MindsEye. Barely. Okay, so it's not as easy as just reviewing this game as a game, because that's not why it's broken, if any of this makes sense. I'm not trying to be difficult or dance around it, but if I just told you that it's a bunch of levels stitched together by canned animated cutscenes, which aren't bad, by the way. Like the mocap and all that's really quite impressive. I enjoy all the cast of characters. Every one of them, they're really cool. The main dude who played, what is his name, Lincoln or whatever in Mafia 3, I don't know where they've been burying him, but they brought him back, and I think he has a sort of physical charisma to him. It's a shame that he's attached to 2 games now that aren't very great. He has that sort of head that you could see them jamming into every single game if possible, which you see that happen with actors, Troy Bakers and that sort of stuff. And the story under the hood, I don't know if I'm spoiling or not. Again, they don't really give you much, but it brushes up against this idea of maybe like a multi-generational ancient civilization thing, sort of tries to tie all different civilizations and together under one pyramid, and inferring there might be aliens or interdimensional beings or something like that maybe even do like a Mass Effect harvest thing. And I'm not trying to be cagey giving you this info, because a lot of this info is so thin. What I've given you is all the game really gives you. It ends on a cliffhanger, and all the history about this game is that it was always intended to be hugely episodic in its design and release structure. They're saying that they will support it with incremental updates after release, but I wouldn't be surprised if this studio closes down in like the next 6 months or something like that. They've already had massive layoffs, and their big business play when they started all this, which was everywhere in the Arcadia tool set, and we'll get to that, but when that came onto the scene, it flopped so incredibly badly, it kind of buried MindsEye there and then. So you can see there's a rich background, and I know a little bit about it, but I didn't know anything going in, like most people. And in many ways, I can understand why people would feel like this is a scam, or at the very least like a bait and switch, because it kind of is. I really think MindsEye in its current state is a case of they need to clear the books, they're going bankrupt, they're about to file or whatever, and they're trying to recruit what little money they can with what product they have on the books at the moment. That's what I think is actually the end result. So yeah, there are these canned story bits that have an inkling of an interesting story. There's a bit of a red herring about AI. It would seem, I don't know, look, maybe the idea is each civilization in past times had AI, and it got to like a singularity point. They play with this idea, but then it feels red herring. The idea that an AI would become incomprehensibly more advanced than what a human could track and monitor, and then that runs away, and that's sort of like this inflection point, kind of like the singularity. So I think the idea is once it gets to that, these alien dudes might possess the AI to take over and then start some sort of human harvest or whatever, and they do that for each civilization over time. Alright, so maybe that's spoilers. It's speculative because the game leaves it hanging, but I think that's what's going on, right? The world framing is that you're playing this dude, he's an ex-military guy, he's got like an amnesiac past from having a drone implant in his head, and he was kind of first contact with these beings. So he's trying to figure out what's going on via this tech company, which is kind of a surrogate commentary on like Elon Musk, specifically what's going on in places like, Texas, where it's a little bit of a tax haven from what I gather, so many companies move out there, and you're kind of in this city that is almost like the Starlink city that seems to be happening out that way. As far as like an actual play space and a world that's built, I find it really interesting. They've obviously put a lot of work into it because their model for game design and the future of MindsEye, or how it was going to go, clearly was to just keep piling more content into this world. So they've front-loaded a lot of building out this really huge map that is quite interesting. You got solar fields over there, you got the huge robotic tech factory that's got rockets and all that, and you need security cars to drive around inside that factory. It's that big. A lot of the design is very modern, arguably modern than most games. And when I say design, I mean like modern architecture, your giant Costco's and all that, where they are humongous, almost empty spaces of giant car park and warehouse-like distribution centers. So there's a lot of that sort of stuff here. And I will say the one really redeeming factor is that there's a section of freeway that is so densely populated, it's incredibly hard to navigate, and that it might be the coolest freeway that I've ever seen. And you're only on there for one section because it's all very on rails story, much like something like Mafia, right? We looked at Mafia Definitive a couple of years ago, and that was quite brilliant, being the open world as a backdrop and just the magic source of, combining what you do in that world and going from A to B. They got the balance right. They got the curation right, which is the core thing that's missing in MindsEye. There is no curation. Again, to harken back, it is by design a cookie cutter production line methodology for churning out video games. And once you see that, you can't unsee that. Okay, so what am I talking about there? Let's unpack again. It is a very difficult thing to pull apart, and I don't write scripts or anything like that, so I'm just doing this off the cuff. Leslie Benzies, big name at GTA, has a falling out. From what I understand, he's owed money, or at least that's what he alleges, right? He spins off and tries to make his own thing, his own company. I don't want to say game. I actually think it's more visionary than that, or at least in his words would probably be. I don't agree with it. And this is right on the back of the phenomenon that is not GTA 5 so much, but GTA Online, which most people will admit, even if you're not into it, which I'm not. I don't understand the appeal. But GTA Online is like the most successful game on the planet by bazillions, right? And the only other games in that same conversation are things like maybe Fortnite, right? And what they sort of have in common is the ability to make custom content, or specifically with GTA Online, because that's where he came from. That's clearly where his worldview came from. You just go around doing these little bite-sized, I'm going to do a race with the boys over here or whatever. It's very slapdash copy paste content, or rather, because I'm not trying to throw salt, and I'm definitely not the expert on GTA Online, but rather it's a platform for what you would probably call infinite content. But that's not what makes it magic, from what I understand. I think it's just being with the boys, it's edgy, it's kind of got that history of GTA, the theme as well. Like, I think there's a lot there that they miss, but if you're looking at from, I don't know, an investor that thinks he's struck gold perspective, then that's what it is. It's a platform for infinite content. At the same time that all this was happening, you got Zuckerberg and all that trying to make things like metaverses happen. These platforms that you can go into, which are sort of launch gates for other stuff. Anyway, so he spins off with Build a Rocket Boy and launches everywhere, which flops colossally, but that was clearly what they thought it was going to be. By definition, this video game platform that you could then launch other content in. People could put their own curated content in there, and there was potentially a way for you to get paid. Like, you could be a creator that makes levels, and if they're well received, you'll get money, that sort of thing, right? So all this, kind of dirty, cynical, top-down executive publisher mentality, not from the gamer perspective. And it didn't help that it looked a bit like Fortnite, and just generally speaking, it flopped horribly. So MindsEye, it would seem, was originally built on the same tool set, which is this middleware called Arcadia, but also potentially to launch through everywhere. I think in the world of Leslie Benzies and his inner circle, they envisioned them changing the industry by creating this one-shoe-fits-all GTA Online type game that you could create infinite games out of, not just vignette content. And that's all, the entire gaming industry could be tapped. Every single person would stop buying games. They would only play everywhere, or they would use the Arcadia toolset to build games within everywhere, and that's it. They would have the market share of the entire gaming space. I actually think that's what they were doing, and MindsEye was an attempt to showcase what a curated, well, I shouldn't even say that because that's the thing that it's missing, but to showcase what a AAA company could actually do with that tool set. And I also think it goes a little bit deeper than that, because they partnered with IO partners, so not an IO interactive game strictly, but just a partnership one-off deal. And I also wonder if the not having marketing, because you don't really renegotiate that when it's going downhill, right? Like, just because a game's about to release and it's got bad buzz and they think it's gonna flop, I don't think a partner usually, as from the publisher perspective, can just say, fuck you, we're going to cease all funding and we're not paying, pretty much probably half of what they were gonna pay, which is the marketing budget. Marketing is usually very, very expensive. I believe, and this is getting into hard speculation, who can really say? Maybe that's exactly what they did and they cut it. But I wonder if what happened is the Build a Rocket Boy platform and system also has a pack-in mentality of being able to get money out of a publisher, but cutting corners? I don't know what you'd say. Having the hubris to think that they don't need a marketing budget, so they need to be committing less of their profit share to the partner. But also, given the modularity of using the Arcadia toolset to build a game, I believe that I actually wonder if the development costs of a MindsEye-like product are infinitesimally small. And so they can cut a much more lucrative and favorable deal with a publisher and still churn out money like crazy to their investors whilst not actually being on the hook for a huge share of their profits. Look, and again, it's all speculation, but my point is something like this is actually what's going on and is actually why MindsEye is a bad game. And yeah, Arcadia is this sort of low-code middleware. You're seeing this sort of stuff in all parts of society. You know, I do software development in real life, and I've worked with low-code systems as well, but they're actually a little bit more reasonable and functional. I think that might be what this is. It's an intentional attempt to middleware its way into the development process. But the funny thing is, there's not really a need for that. I think a lot of the tool suites like Unity and Unreal Engine even are actually incredibly usable, and you've got other more indie suites, you know, your RPG makers and that bloody French one, I can't remember what it is, for like Flash type games. But I feel like if you wanted to get into game dev and you're like some teenage kid at home with an internet connection, you can just make a game. You could make a really good quality game if you've got the skills. I don't think the tools are missing. So again, to be further cynical, this seems like an attempt to try and monetize that space with their own tool set, with their own platform. Anyway, with all of that, then we can sort of come back to the core of MindsEye and talk about it. As I alluded to before, yeah, it's these cutscenes that have been filmed with a perfectly good audience of actors, and they're doing the best they can with what they've done, but you can tell with what they're moving, it's just this mocap section, and I wouldn't be surprised, because I don't know much about the Arcadia toolset. They're kind of cagey, actually. There's a lot of betas and all that, and especially with the way shit's going, I can see they're closing ranks a bit. But I wouldn't be surprised if they've got some sort of proprietary mocap, something that isn't necessarily publicly out there, but that they used for MindsEye. Some sort of iPhone head rig or something that you can then map into the game, because it's all the cutscenes are done in-engine, with in-engine assets with in-engine limitations. You know, stupid shit like explosions and the terrible fire decals and that. It's not like they're curated or handcrafted. It's not like a developer's gone into the base code and changed the way certain things behave in the cutscenes or in the game or anything like that. There is zero curation going beyond the front door toolset. So yeah, the cutscenes are just clearly people in a room dancing around with props and that sort of stuff, and there is a jank to it because that's as surface level as it gets. You clearly act out the cutscene, you capture it, then you put it into the engine and render it, and off you go. So that's all of the story is done that way, and it feels, again, as someone that doesn't know the tool sets and how they're doing it specifically, but I can still see the limitations. That's what's going on. There's a very cookie cutter way to have created these mocap cutscenes that are, like I said, all in engine. And then they're stitched together by kind of busy work missions that are really cookie cutter, again, built in the Arcadia engine through the whatever it is, Build It MindsEye Everywhere client. So much so that the game has, for example, there's no map, there's no skip cutscene, there's no UI in any way outside of the build.MindsEye, which is just the front end of the Everywhere Arcadia toolset, right? So you press pause, what it brings up is a menu where, yeah, you can change some settings, but it's pretty much play the story or launch the build protocol, right? And then you go into building from wherever you are at the time. So it's very much almost like you're running it from the developer's perspective of running an in-engine game, but through the, you know, like the Unreal client or whatever, as opposed to a packaged final product. And so you could just go in there, and I played a little bit with it, but not a lot. I have no interest in those sort of tool suites. But it is limited, right? You place these dudes down. All the dudes are in the game already. The environments are fixed and built. And all the missions that you do will be some combination of just push to the checkpoint, shoot these dudes that spawn, escorts occasionally, driving missions, which are all very shallow, like, because you can't shoot out of the car, but you can't really damage the enemy car. And again, just think of a chase in any GTA game or whatever. A lot of them will have like a fixed situation where the car rolls into almost like this packed in animation, right? It'll be custom. It might crash into a car and start an explosion or whatever. None of that stuff exists in here because the tool set does not allow for that. So it's really bare bones. And so the shooting is really bare bones as well, right? There's no melee or anything like that. You got ammo and health systems from last generation. You just got a weapons radial. You can't switch shoulders. Really rudimentary cover systems. So everything is like bare bones to the point of last generation bad. But I think I've impressed upon you my point that MindsEye, in a different universe where everything went right for Build a Rocket Boy and what they thought was correct, which clearly it wasn't, was that they're going to spin off. They're going to launch everywhere as a platform. They're going to capture the GTA Online audience and all these people that they misunderstood, but everyone's going to go, wow, this is great. This is what gaming's going to be in the next generation. And we're all going to play on everywhere. We're going to get familiar with the Arcadia middleware to build in this system. And then people are going to start making games. And then after that positive reaction in that alternate universe, they go, here's MindsEye. And I bet you it would have different flourish, you know? Because on the front end, to people be like, guess what? We built this entirely within the Everywhere model or within the Everywhere platform that you guys all love and are excited about. And look at it. Yeah, okay, sure. It's a little bit maybe generic, you know? It's not super duper, but this is a first attempt from a AAA company with a publishing arrangement with a third party to make a AAA game totally encased within the Arcadia Everywhere front end. And you too can do that in your garage at home. Oh, wow, that's amazing. I can make AAA games from my seat. Not really realizing that people can do exactly that already, pretty much. You know, some of the indie stuff that we see come out of single-man studios is wild. And then I think maybe from the publisher back end, they could probably use this as a tech demo pitch to them and say, hey, look, here's the money, here's IO's risk margin, how much money they were out. They recouped their normal, I don't know, their profit margin that they would normally get from this publishing arrangement, but it's at lower risk. And we, to their investors, we made even much more money doing this hypothetically. And yet all we really did was go in there and add a few enemies to a room and click play and turn that into a thing and stitch it together with cutscenes. To me, that's really clearly what's attempted to happen here. Except, you know, the great downfall is it was a terrible idea from the beginning. And as much as this Leslie Benzies and his crew were renowned fixers, they were the guys you brought in to get GTA back on target and all that sort of stuff. Well, maybe that's not true, or maybe he should have stayed in his lane, because this whole thing to me is kind of a boomer detached investor's mentality of what gamers want. And that is the secret sauce to why MindsEye is a terrible game. So yeah, look, I didn't have an absolute miserable time playing it, but the shooting, it's terrible, it's clunky. I did a lot of sequence breaking on purpose, right? Because the game would just give you waypoints within the world, right? Like, it's not like it could give you curated GPS pathing when you're off a road. So there's clearly a GPS system built into the engine to nav on roads that you have no control over, by the way. The main character just turns it on with his phone. But as soon as you go cross country, it just gives you a waypoint, and there will be clearly a critical path you're supposed to take, but if you don't take it, you might get stuck and jammed up or whatever. But the game doesn't have any of the fidelity to go in there and kind of plot out a manual route and explain it to you, because this is a cookie cutter suite made for production line game production. So yeah, a lot of the time I would try my best to run around an engagement, right? Here's the waypoint on one side, they've spawned a shitload of dudes in the other, but it's still an open world, you know, it's not like there's invisible walls, it's not like they have the tools or the fidelity to stop me going around the engagement, and quite often that's what I would do, especially at the end where their answer was, we're going to give you a bazillion bad guys to stop you getting through. Like, it became unpleasantly fun. I will say that as they gave you like a drone that can electric zap one-tap dude and possess robots, and they gave you a 50 cal pistol that can one-tap people. So once they sort of gave you god weapons and tools, it kind of became okay. But then right after that, they started just slamming you with even more meat monsters, you know, level 3 robots that were just so incredible. You couldn't possess them, and they're just bullet sponges. And the answer was just more enemies of that you have to, that will grind you down eventually because there's 10 dudes hitting you from cover from all angles. But yeah, like I found that I could just run out into the desert and go around a lot of engagements and then come back in and sequence break it, because once you hit that waypoint or checkpoint, you know, the enemies will despawn, or if you die, that's where you'd come back to. Well, actually, that's not totally correct. The checkpoints were very arbitrary and chapter limited, and like I said, you can't skip cutscenes or anything like that. Anyway, I don't need to waffle. I'm more fascinated than disappointed. I wouldn't recommend this to anyone other than someone curious. You know, if you were going to do a documentary on the stuff that I've touched on here, that clearly something's going on the back end in an attempt to revolutionize the way that we produce games, clearly to be more generic and cookie cutter and more palatable from an investor perspective. But the missing ingredient was that you do need hand curation. You need someone to go in there and move the assets around and change the AI pathing and customize and make the experience special. You can't just have generic asset flip toolset stuff. It's not going to pass muster with games. So this is kind of a big victory for gamers, the fact that this game has failed so hard, because it does telegraph to the industry that what they're thinking is wrong. And money talks at the end of the day. They might not agree. They might go, stupid gamers, they should be able to enjoy cookie cutter slop, but they will at the end of the day still recognize that they can't do this, or at least they need to do something to make it more palatable to us, because money talks and no one's buying this. So yeah, I don't know, maybe get it on $5 or $10 on sale just to see what's going on here, but I'd give it a wide berth. I hope this video has been more informative than just bashing it. I'm not an expert, I'm not an investigative journalist or anything like that, but I went in knowing nothing about any of these third-party platforms. I just thought this was, you know, some AA action game that was potentially going to throw back to yesteryear. So that's why I was apprehensively a little bit excited at first blush. Upon looking at it, this game was kind of destined to fail, and I feel like it being launched at full price, not on the everywhere platform, is an attempt to just recoup some money before they go under, because the whole thing is on fire. Anyway, let me know what you reckon, team. Might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.